Today I am doing a Zoom interview with Dr. Harry Drage. Hello, Dr. Drage.
Hello.
So I met Dr. Harry. Do I call you Dr. Harry?
Yeah, Dr. Harry's perfect.
Dr. Harry, yes, because we had a show in Australia about a vet called Dr. Harry. I think it was Dr. Harry. Yes. Anyway, so living things, animals and stuff. So, but anyway, I'm talking to the better Dr. Harry. So I met you when you were in Australia, looking and exploring some of the early Cambrian stuff, Anomalocaris and those kinds of things. And but I want to begin our conversation by going back in time, not that far back. I want to go back in time to your past. I want to go back to before you were Dr. Harry, and when you were little Harriet, and what were the things that you were interested as a kid that might have been hints and suggestions that at some point you might have gone on to study or be interested in paleontology?
So I am actually one of those people that as a kid was obsessed with fossils and dinosaurs and everything like that. And I'm one of those people that just never grew out of that obsession. So from, like the age of 5, I was crazy about finding fossils and about going to museums, and my parents would take me to museums literally whenever I could convince them to. Natural history museums all over England and all over the UK, and whenever we went on holiday, I would always make them take me to natural history museums if there was one in the area. And I was just so obsessed with it. And from that point, I just never grew out of looking at things to do with fossils. So from that point, I told my parents, this is it. I can be a paleontologist, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I just clung on to that forever, basically. So I always had decided that I was going to be a paleontologist. I told everybody, that's what everyone knew about me. And I had piles and piles of fossils in my bedroom. Like, it drove my parents crazy because there was always rocks everywhere, just picking up dust and like shedding bits of rock, and they hated it. And neither of them are scientists at all, and my mum was a teacher. So they were kind of didn't necessarily understand the obsession, but I basically spent all of my time as a little girl on fossils.
Which is fascinating, isn't it? Because it's interesting when you try and what was it? What was it that little Harry just went, that's it, and you stuck with it? Because I've had some really interesting conversations, and there are some people that are professors now that are like, well, I didn't really until later. There are some that yep, dinosaurs were the thing, and then I found some that are like, oh, I loved biology or geology. But what was it? And what was it that kept you continuing? For you, what's the fascination?
I think it built up over a few years, where I kind of first fell in love with the idea, and then kind of over the next few years decided that that's what I was going to do. And I think it was kind of a combination of things over those times. So initially, I always loved biology, and that had always been kind of my fascination. And so I always wanted to go into something that was biological anyway. And from a really early age, I spent lots of time watching documentaries on various biology things. And so like many other people my age, everyone was obsessed with Steve Irwin. I spent a lot of time watching Steve Irwin, but I also watched a lot of other similar kind of people that worked in natural history and people that went out into the bush. There were lots in Australia, which is great. There we go. So I wanted to go there from an early age. And I used to watch all of that lifestyle and that interaction with animals. And I particularly, for some reason, I particularly was really obsessed with reptiles, and I still love them. I love them. I would love a pet snake. I think they're fascinating and beautiful. And so I used to watch loads of that. And then that kind of transitioned slightly into watching stuff on, obviously there's a lot of dinosaur related stuff, so onto that area of paleontology. And I think we'll revisit this when we talk about Marianne, but I'm from an area of the UK that is very fossil rich. And there's a lot of emphasis on paleontology where I'm from. And so because we have that availability of seeing fossils, my mum would take me to the seaside collecting fossils. So I'd get into it that way. And because I'm from not too far outside London, we would go to the Natural History Museum in London all the time. And I'd see the big dinosaur exhibits and all the big zoology exhibits, and kind of seeing those and spending more and more time kind of on the beach looking for fossils, I got more and more into paleontology. So then I watched more documentaries on it, and then I got more obsessed. And then my parents were really, really encouraging with this and really good. And I do owe a lot of my interest in the subject to them encouraging me, because they then did things that when we went on family holidays when I was a kid, and one in particular when I was 10-ish, we went to Canada, and my parents actually took us on a driving detour all the way into Alberta, into the Badlands, so that I could visit the Drumheller Museum, which is an incredible dinosaur museum. Like, it's incredible, and it's in such a beautiful place. And we could even go out with some of the scientists, and we went on like a dig in the Badlands with some of the scientists. And that really kind of seeing people working in paleontology and that kind of atmosphere, that was kind of, from that point I was like, right, this is it, this is what I want to do, type of thing. So it was kind of that gradual build up, and having my parents take me to a lot of things that then I kind of set my mind to it.
Yeah, and that thing then just being in that place and seeing it kind of confirmed it, and seeing, and I guess that thinking and thought of yours of saying, I belong here. This is
Yeah.
what I should be doing. So where are you now?
So now I'm actually not directly working in paleontology. I have done a PhD in paleontology, and I spent 4 years doing that here in Oxford in England. And that was great. And I travelled all over the world and all to Australia numerous times, which was brilliant. Some of my favourite bits. And actually, on finishing my PhD, I have gone into something that is related, because what I actually work in now is making science educational products for children and for people learning science. So what I actively do now is I make the textbooks and resources and things for school children all over the UK and all over the world, to help them with science and to engage them with their learning of science. So I directly now work in helping kids to kind of pursue and progress in science.
Which is fantastic. So having come from where you have, and young Harry would have benefited even more from having the kinds of things that you're now creating, but also having the skill that you do, and the having done the research, and having sort of, because of course, as you and I know, the one true science is paleontology, right? Well, it's all of them, isn't it? You know, it's geology, physics, chemistry, all of them kind of fit. So those are all
Yeah.
feed up, and there's paleontology kind of sitting at the top of it all. Okay, you mentioned Mary Anning before, and one of the reasons we're doing these conversations, as well as being able to say hello to some of my favorite people that I've met on the paleo journey, but it's also to talk about Mary Anning, because she turns, well, she's not because she's dead, but were she still alive, she would have been on May the 18th, May the 21st, sorry, 221 years old. So to ask you first, what did you know of her story as you were coming into this obsession as young Harriet? What did you know? Was she a hero? Was she somebody you'd never heard of? Tell us about your early, I guess, understanding of Mary's story.
So I actually think and it's really interesting for me being involved with this, because I actually think she's been a real inspiration for me as a young kid pursuing paleontology. As I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, I'm from a really similar area of the country to her. So she's from Dorset, which is kind of in the middle of the south of England, and I'm from just over to the east of her, on the same coast. So it's the same geology, it's the same age of the rocks and the same fossils on the bit that I was born in as well. So actually we have very similar kind of environments that we've grown up in, which is one thing. And also because she is quite well known in my area of the country because of that. So there's actually a lot that you can see on her, and a lot in different museums, lots of exhibitions on her. And particularly in places like when, as a child, I would go to Natural History Museum in London. I don't know if Professor Flint's been to the Natural History Museum in London.
I was only a wee lad.
Okay. So there's, right in the middle of the museum in the old building, there's a massive, massive corridor. So it's really wide, it's really tall ceiling. And all along this huge tall wall on the side are all of the fossils that Mary Anning collected. So loads of the plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs that she collected and that she discovered first. And they're all along this big wall. And there is quite a lot of information along with the fossils to tell you about the fossils and to tell you about Mary Anning, because she discovered them. So actually, from these types of exhibitions, I knew a huge amount about her from a young age, and I knew that she collected fossils in the same places that I did. And so that was a really big influence for me. And my mum also knew a lot about her because of that. So we kind of felt that we were following in her footsteps, being women that were collecting in the same places as her, the same types of things as her, and seeing all of her amazing discoveries laid out. And actually, it was really nice for me, because when I started my first degree in paleontology, so my undergraduate in London, in my first year, we actually went on a field trip to Dorset, like a week. And so I'd kind of been on holiday and things, but this time I got to go with other people that were learning with me and with our professors. And we got to go to exactly where she's from, and all of the same places in Lyme Regis, and got to actually look at all of the real geology with someone that really knew all of the history about it and that could tell us about it. So it was kind of really nice, because I'd come full circle almost from spending time in the same places as her as a kid to actually learning in detail all of these things that she, would have looked at and would have thought about.
And I guess that thing of knowing that you're walking where she walked.
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing the same things that she did, and the same sea. The rocks might have changed, particularly because that area is known for collecting from landslides where it comes down after big storms. So the rocks and the profile would have changed, but all of the shoreline would be the same. The town's still there, of course, loads of the buildings are the same. And it is really fascinating.
So, fabulous personal journey in terms of your personal connection to her. I wonder, my last question is really about where then does she sit in terms of, because technically she wasn't a scientist, but she would have been had she been alive now, because she would have been accepted into all of the, because her skill level, her capacity to identify fossils, to prep fossils, all of that. It's like, hello, can you come to Oxford? No, no, we want her at Harvard. No, we want her at, like, clearly that would have, she would have been,
Exactly.
and as it was, she was kind of in demand by some significant people at the time, because, and there's a quote that she talks about some of the men sucking out her brains and stuff, because, you know, they got all the credit, but the cool thing is we talk of her, not of them.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to ask to finish off with, after that massive preamble, is where does she sit amongst scientists or people of science? And that may be a better way of describing her. But also, where does she sit in the pantheon of paleontology?
Yeah, so I think that it's really important that we know her story these days. It's, of course, a massive tragedy that she wasn't appreciated in her time, because if she had been, she might have gone on to discover a lot more if she'd had the kind of benefits that a lot of the men working in science had. So if she had the money behind it, if she had the ability to go and find new places, then she might have discovered a lot more. However, I'd say that from my personal perspective, and particularly now that I work in kind of science education, I think everyone that's interested in science and that wants to do something in science is a scientist. We're all working together and we're all working on the same things, and it takes all types of people to make scientific discoveries and to progress science. It takes all people to think in all different ways, and if we just have one type of person in science, we are absolutely not going to progress as fast or in as interesting directions. And I think particularly paleontology has had a kind of traditional viewpoint where we kind of imagine that one type of person working in it, and that type of person is largely
And it looks like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to say, yeah, this is the, maybe not with the hat, but this is this is the traditional look, and I'm totally okay that we can break this down. You know.
Exactly, and the thing is, those people come from a kind of a similar shared background, and that's not a fault, but it does mean that we don't have these alternative viewpoints necessarily, and we really need these different viewpoints and ways of thinking in order to progress. And so Mary Anning was really one of these first people. She had, not just from being a woman, but she had an alternative viewpoint because she was coming at paleontology from a different perspective. You know, it was her livelihood, and it was important to her family on a personal level, and on a very local level, looking at the things around her that she'd grown up with. And so to have that perspective on science is really important. It's just as important as having people from other places that work on a site. So her experiences have really shown that we need all these types of people in order to work out problems. And I think, you know, this alone shows that it's really important that these days there's no excuse for not having all of these types of people working together. And not just, you know, research scientists, but everyone that's involved with science all working together.
Absolutely. On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Harriet,
You're very welcome.
And all the very best. And of course, happy birthday, Mary Anning.
Happy birthday, Mary.